Okay, welcome to chapter 13, the Age of Exploration. This is the last chapter for our unit on the Age of Awakening. Okay, this is your vocabulary terms, and these are your objectives for this section. You should be able to identify the motives that led explorers to venture to the ends of the earth and list the major explorers, the countries for which they sailed, and the areas of the world that they explored. So here you have the layout of the major headings and subheadings for the chapter. I would take a minute to skim through the chapter and create a prediction statement. Remember that I will grade your prediction statements. You should have something there. I predict that blank will lead to blank because blank is the general format that I would like you to stick with for this particular chapter. So go ahead, pause, take 5 minutes, skim and scan through chapter 13 and come up with a good prediction statement. So why is this known as the Age of Exploration? And when we talk about the Age of Exploration, we are talking about the years 1450 to 1650. So roughly 200 years. There are many reasons why this becomes the Age of Exploration. There's a lot of things that lead up to it. One of those things would be the Crusades. The Crusades caused Europeans to have an interest in foreign lands because they've been out to the Muslim Empire, to the Holy Land. They've come into contact with all of these goods that the Muslims are trading with the Orient and getting, things like silk and spices. And so now they've developed like a taste and a desire for those things. So that's a part of why they want to go discover the world and discover ways to get to the stuff that they want. Marco Polo, I'm sure you guys have heard of Marco Polo. And his adventures in China, and supposedly that he brought back noodles to Italy so that now you can have spaghetti. And most of the Marco Polo stuff is myth. There's actually some historians that doubt that he ever made it to China. There's a possibility that he knew someone that had gone to China and he kind of stole his stories and then resold them as his own. But that's a topic of debate. And that might be something one of you would do for your research project. That could be interesting. But anyway, no matter what, his stories have captured the interest of Europe. The Renaissance, remember the Renaissance as this rebirth of learning, of people being interested in science, has provided Europe with the means, so like the way for them to go out and discover new lands. Okay, it's given them navigational tools. And it's given them the financial means because during the Renaissance, you have a lot of prosperity and commerce happening. Okay, so Europeans' goals right now at this point in time are to search for new trade routes. They want to reopen trade routes with the East, so meaning China and India. They're looking for things like diamonds and rubies, silk, porcelain, spices. Spices especially are important. You might think it's crazy that people would risk so much just to get something like pepper or nutmeg. And the reason for that really was not only are people pretty stinky during this time period, and you could use spices for perfume to help cover up that smell, because remember, people aren't taking baths on a regular basis here. Also, meat oftentimes went bad and your food was really bland, and until we get spices and things like sugar into our diet, eating is pretty miserable. So once people are able to buy these things and use them, they're really excited about them and they feel like it's something they can't live without. And for a good portion of this time that we're discussing, it's really the wealthy that are going to be able to buy these types of items. Okay, so the only way to get to the Orient at this point in time is to use an overland route that crosses the Middle East. And so you have to go through the Muslims to get to the East and get to the things that you want. And if we're having problems with the Muslims, right, we've come into conflict with them because of the Crusades, we're fighting each other, using this route is not going to be the best idea. So we're going to look for something else that's easier. There's also rugged terrain and desert and mountain, and that's hard. And local rulers will charge caravans to pass through, and pretty much the Italians have a monopoly on Oriental trade this way. They've kind of taken it upon themselves and they're dealing with the Muslims and going this way. So that's going to leave places like Spain and Portugal looking for a different way to reach the Orient. Okay, so also Europeans are looking for gold. They know of gold in Africa. They've heard these stories about there being tons of gold in Africa, but they don't know exactly where it is. So a lot of Europeans actually die um, trying to find this mythical gold in Africa. Another motive for exploration is a desire for adventure and glory. The Renaissance spirit, remember, it's a spirit of curiosity and inquiry and a desire for people to be famous and to have that kind of glory for themselves of individual achievement. So people want to go out and find a new country so they can name it after themselves and feel good about themselves. Okay. And there's some religious concerns as well. Muslims are still Muslims are still a concern. Again, we know the crusade spirit is still alive. We want to go out and have adventures and maybe fight, and we want to see people converted to Christianity. There's rumors of this king in Africa known as Prester John, who's supposed to be this Christian king in Africa that wants to help the Christians kind of combat the Muslims. And so people will go out to Africa to try to find him as well, not just gold, but they never find him. And here's, it's like the close-up of a little memorial that says, in memory of those seafarers who searched for Prester John between those years that were looking for this man. And so this might also be an interesting topic for your research paper about whether or not Prester John was real and what evidence we can find for him. So there's also competition during this time period among European nations, and we'll talk about economics in the last section of this chapter, and we'll talk about mercantilism and what that has to do with competition among these nations. All the nations want to be wealthy, and they want all of the other nations to be less wealthy. So a way to become wealthy is to establish trade settlements and to encourage colonization, because if you have colonies, you'll have raw materials to trade, and you'll have places that you can develop to make more money. Hopefully you'll find gold in these colonies, things like that. Okay, so navigational tools that are going to help us in our quest to explore the world. There's 3 important ones that you need to know for your book. Accurate maps. There had been maps before, but now maps are much more accurate. And also with the invention of the printing press, if you remember Gutenberg from the Renaissance chapter, you could buy maps more easily. Now these maps are pretty accurate for things like the coast of Africa or the Mediterranean. But as far as people coming across the Atlantic, people that are true explorers, these maps aren't going to help that much. You have the compass now being used regularly. And you have locator instruments to tell you where you are. So it's not just that you sailed west. You'd be able to figure out where you were, knowing your latitude, the distance from the equator, with these different tools. Also, there were some problems with these, like you couldn't use them in cloudy weather. Okay. And there's several different tools that they used for this. Okay. Well, let's focus on maps. Maps, I've already told you the accuracy of the Mediterranean had improved, but they're still going into uncharted waters. But when they brought back information, they would improve the maps. So here you see an early map, and it kind of, you can tell how North America and South America don't look quite right. So this is kind of like a guesstimation map. They were just kind of guessing. This was their best guess of what it looked like. Here's some of the navigational tools I was telling you about. You have the compass, which was invented by the Chinese, but finally it's mounted onto card, making it easier to use. You have the astrolabe and the quadrant and the cross staff. These measured the angle between the star and the horizon to determine latitude. And like I told you, they're useless in cloudy weather, and oftentimes when the deck of the ship is moving around on the water, these wouldn't be very accurate. But it's better than nothing. Okay, so seagoing vessels. Before this time period, we don't have anything that can withstand a trip across an ocean like the Atlantic. You have ships obviously traveling across the Mediterranean, but nothing is as durable as it's going to need to be to get across somewhere like the Atlantic. Think about like ancient Romans, and they would have the pretty large ship, but they'd have like the rowers in the ship, okay? And generally the sails were that square kind of a sail. And there's some issues with this type of ship. as far as a long journey would be concerned. So we take some stuff from our interactions with the Muslims actually, and we create a new ship, and it's called the Caravel. And this is a very light, fast ship. It used both the large square sails and triangular sails, so it could churn easier. It was much faster, easy to maneuver, and it had higher sides on the ship, so like you wouldn't be capsized. Water wouldn't come onto your boat and turn you over or sink you as much. Not that that wasn't a possibility, but not like the other ships from before. Okay, so here's your paragraph shrink. Exploration, riches, advances. Here's your SRQ check. What man's account of his travels awakened European curiosity in the Orient? In what Asian land did he spend 17 years? In whose court did he serve as an advisor? This is all stuff that you can find in your textbook on page 303. The answer is Marco Polo, China, Kublai Khan. What three things were of great importance to the early explorers? Accurate maps, a compass, navigational instruments, any combination of these items. What light, fast vessel was popular with the early explorers of the late 15th century? That would be the Caravel. List 5 motives that prompted European explorers to seek out and discover. New trade routes to the Orient, quest for gold, adventure, glory, religious concerns, competition between nations. Okay, this will be your bell work. So come to class prepared to write a response to this. What motivated the explorers to sail through uncharted waters? Which of these motivations would you find the most appealing and why? And we're just going to move on into the first half of section 2. Leading nations of the age of exploration. That would be Portugal and Spain. Okay, they're kind of forced to be the leading nations because they need to find a way to trade with the Orient because Italy has that monopoly, if you remember. So factors, reasons for their success. Shipping had always been a principal industry for both of these places. They're there on the Iberian Peninsula. There's actually a lot of fishermen in these countries, okay, because they're coastal. And so they have that experience with being out on the sea. They're looking southward and westward instead of towards the Mediterranean. So they're looking towards the west and down south towards Africa. And they have experienced sailors, like I said, with techniques and tools that they've borrowed from the Moors. And if you remember, the southern part of Spain was actually occupied by the Moors until the Reconquista. So they have this influence. The Moors are the Muslims there living in northern Africa. And so the crusading spirit is well and alive, that desire to see people converted, and again, that adventuring spirit. Okay, Portugal will actually kind of take the lead at first. They will round the tip of Africa. This has to do with Prince Henry the Navigator. He's fascinated with Africa. He's fascinated with stories of gold, of King Prester. And he begins a school for navigation. So if you wanted to be a sailor, you wanted to be an explorer, you would go to his school. So he has geographers, the best astronomers, map makers, sea captains. And so he lays this foundation for the nation of Portugal to be great seafarers. And if you see there in the corner, you have a tropical cafe or tropical smoothie thing. That will be your bonus question on your quiz. Okay, Portugal continues this legacy with people like Bartolomeu Diaz. 30 years after the death of Prince Henry the Navigator, he will round the tip of Africa, and you can kind of see it on this map. He goes from up towards Portugal and goes down the coast. He's actually in a storm and kind of blown off course for 13 days, and when he reemerges from the storm, he figures out that he is on the other side of the Cape of Good Hope, so around the tip of Africa. Okay, and then we'll have Vasco da Gama. He will leave Portugal, and after a year, he will finally arrive all the way in India, which we can't see on this map, but you can see, kind of what his voyage was like around Africa and out towards India. He traded for spices, made a huge amount of money doing so. Let me check and I'll tell you guys the exact number here. Or not. I thought I had it. Anyway, he trades for spices, and it really, I mean, the amount of spices that he brings back more than pays for the actual voyage out there. So it was very, very profitable. And so this finally breaks the Muslim monopoly with trade with India. So now Portugal will be trading with India regularly. Okay, finally we get to Christopher Columbus, right? The one that we should all know and remember from elementary school. I know the little poem about, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Okay, Columbus studied Ptolemy, if you remember Ptolemy from our studies of the Greeks, who was a mathematician, okay, who had some theories about the size of the earth. He studied the stories of Marco Polo, and pretty much from Ptolemy's theories on the size of the earth, Christopher Columbus thought he could reach Asia, so he could reach Japan, China by sailing west. And he finally convinces Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand to fund this voyage. So in 1492, he takes the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, his 3 ships, and he sails west. He is wrong because Ptolemy's calculations were off. He didn't have the size of the earth correct, and Columbus wasn't anticipating running into this huge landmass that would be between him and Asia, which is North and South America. October 12th, he sights land finally. They land. They name it San Salvador. And Columbus will end up thinking that Cuba is China and Hispaniola, and that's where Haiti and the Dominican Republic are, was Japan. And Columbus, there's a lot of different theories about him. Right now, there's some historians debating whether or not he was even Italian. Some people think he was actually Polish. He gets a lot of credit for being the first person to come over here, but we know that the Vikings actually made voyages to North America back in the 10th and 11th centuries, and they actually had settlements that lasted for more than a year, and we often don't give them the credit. So it's kind of interesting. Why do you think we give Christopher Columbus the credit? And maybe that's something we could talk about in class more. It's definitely something that we'll discuss in U.S. history next year. Okay, so now Spain is continuing to sail westward, and there's some argument between Spain and Portugal about who should be allowed to go where. So Pope Alexander VI draws a line dividing the world between Spain and Portugal. And this is a large reason of why Portugal is more influential in colonizing Africa and the East Indies, where Spain really colonizes the New World in North America, South America in particular, and except for Brazil. You can see where the line is, and the line was moved too. So you had the line of demarcation, and then there's another treaty, the Treaty of Tordesillas, and they moved the line again, and that gives Portugal this chunk of Brazil, and that's why Brazil is one of the only countries in South America that speaks Portuguese instead of Spanish. So now Spain gets cut off from going around Africa to get to India. So they still have a problem they need to figure out. How do we get to India? How do we get to China? Okay, why do you think that God timed the Age of Exploration and the Reformation simultaneously? What results are benefiting us today because of this coincidence? Think this over. Something we'll discuss in class. It would be a good idea to kind of jot down a response now.